Hello, 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 folks. Hey, Wade, how are you today? We're going to get started here in about 1 minute. It's kind of chilly where I am. I don't know about you all. How's everybody's weekend going so far? Hailstorms and tornado warnings. My goodness. Wow. Well, I hope you stay safe anyway. Hope you have a basement or someplace you can go if things start kicking off. Tornado warnings are no joke. Wow. Hey, Champo, how's it going? Well, on that note, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I hope there's no tornadoes in your area. Um, so, brief digression there. Yeah, so tornado warnings are really interesting because I grew up in like tornado country, and so I know what those are like, and I know what it's like to have a tornado in your area. But so many folks don't. So many folks live in places where tornadoes just aren't a thing. And so it's always really interesting to hear from folks who do and don't know what tornadoes are like. I'm curious if any. I'm curious how many folks out there have lived in tornado country or haven't lived in tornado country. So maybe we'll need to do a poll on that later on. If third decade doesn't join and have their own request. But yeah, so today we are continuing our React series, and today we're going to be talking about structuring state. And so last week we talked about what state is. And so state is just kind of how we make react to stuff, right? So we all, so far in this series we've talked about components and we've talked about props, and we've talked about event handlers, right? Event handlers are how we take in user interactions, how we capture those. But then how do we actually sort of control how React reacts to those inputs? And that is via state, right? And state just holds kind of the current configuration of, well, whatever we want it to hold, really, right? It holds our current configuration. And then we can call on a certain function to specifically update that state whenever we want it to. And so it's kind of a give and take, right? We can hold certain values in state, and whenever we want to update those, we can call a specific function called set and then whatever our state name is in order to update that value. So real quick recap here of what state is because it's very important. So we're not going to go through this whole section again. We spent the entire. If you want to do an in-depth dive on this, we're gonna. You can go back to last week's stream and go through it there. But we had a brief talk about declarative versus imperative UI. As far as JavaScript is imperative. So basically, with if you were trying to write something in JavaScript, you basically tell JavaScript exactly what you want to do at any point. And the analogy they used here was somebody directing a car, like giving directions, right? And you saying, all right, turn left here. Oh wait, merge in here. Speed limit 45. Turn right, turn left, go straight. Whereas with React, what we do instead is we just say, hey, I want to get here. I want to go to, I don't know, I want to go to the Science Museum. And then React decides how we get there. And that's called declarative. So these are two different types of philosophies of programming languages or frameworks. And JavaScript is imperative, which is fine. It works great for a lot of things. But React is declarative. So we give it the end goal, we give it the end destination, and we don't really care how we get there. We let React figure that out. And it's a little bit freeing in a way. There's other languages that are declarative as well. SQL, what I work with for my day job, is actually declarative too. You give SQL a statement like, um, select all records of users living in Indiana and from the user table. And what it gives back is a list of all records for users living in Indiana. I didn't tell it how to do that. I didn't say, okay, loop through all these records in order XYZ and check the state row and match it where state value equals Indiana. I mean, I didn't give it explicit instructions on how to do that. I just said, hey, fetch me these records. Let me know when you're done. And that's kind of how SQL, that's SQL works in that way. It's declarative. You tell it what you want, it gets it for you, but you don't always have control on how it does that. And sometimes it could be inefficient in its methods. So that's a whole other conversation. But React is similar in that way. Oh, and I should turn on captions as well. My apologies. I just got my automated reminder. Oh, and Chris says, I'm not in the eye of the storm though. Tiny hail possibilities, nothing too major. That's good. Although hail also sucks. I lived in a state for a while where it seemed like, oh, KNOY, Dev, thank you so much for the follow. Thank you, thank you. So I lived in a state for a while where we got hailstorms all the time. And at the time, I was living in an apartment. And so I didn't have a garage or like a carport or anything. I didn't pay for a carport. And so my car got like hail damage because it just was always hailstorms all the time. So yeah, hail sucks too. Whoa! Tame Mister, thank you so much for the resub. I appreciate it. And it looked like my notifications actually work now. I was tinkering with that a little bit beforehand, so I'm glad they work. Did y'all see an alert on the screen when that happened? I saw it appear in my feed, but did an alert come up on the screen? Yeah, you saw it. All right, awesome, Tame Mister. Thank you for letting me know. Yeah, so I'm glad those are fixed now. I don't know what happened, but I fixed it. Awesome. Chris says, dang, that sucks. I hope your car insurance covered the hail damages. It wasn't bad enough. I didn't submit it for insurance. My car is what year is it? My car is almost 15 years old, so I mean, it doesn't really matter at this point. It's a good car though. All right, so anyway, back to what we were talking about. We're talking about state, the difference between imperative and declarative. React is declarative. Um, and so when we think about our UI as declarative instead of imperative, um, we basically, what we do is we figure out all the individual states that we want our user interface to be in. So we think about, all right, for a given component, how many different configurations do I want it to have as far as how it looks to the user? And so we think about that in terms of, all right, these are all the possible states my UI could be in. And then we determine, so here's the steps, right? We identify our components' different visual states. We determine what triggers those changes. We represent that state in memory using useState. We remove any non-essential variables, and then we connect those to event handlers. And so we really use state to think about, all right, what are all the different ways I want my UI to display to the user? And how that's going to look is, let me find a good example here. There's a good graph here. So in this example, we have a form. So what we're doing here is we're triggering, we have a form. And as we interact with that form, we can see that, let's do, what's this, Lima? Oh, is this, wait, I want to find a working version of this. So I can show you all the different states. There we go, this one works. All right, so in this example, we have a form, it asks a question, and then you'll notice that as I type in the form, the button changes. So that's clearly a state change, right? That's clearly a state change. Something has changed to change the behavior of the UI and the look of the UI. And then when I submit that, we see another change, right? For a moment there, after I clicked the submit button, the text box and the submit button became unavailable. I couldn't use them, right? And then we had yet another state change after a moment where my answer was checked. Now the text box and the submit button become available again, and I get my wrong answer. Now, if I submit a right answer, you can watch closely and see, once again, the text box and the button became unavailable for a moment, and then the right answer displays a completely different UI. So what you're seeing there are changes in state, and those are going to be captured in state variables. So we can see those variables here, right? These are state variables, and you'll notice they all look similar in their construction, and that's by design. This is how state variables always are built. Last week we went kind of into a deep dive on these and how they look and what they're for. But in brief, whenever you're declaring a state variable, it's a const. Oh, thank you, Carl, for the follow. We're declaring a const, and then we set up an array. And in this array, the first value is always what we call that state variable. So in this one, we have answer. And then the second value is always the function that we use to update that answer. So whenever we want to change that answer value, we would call set answer to update our state variable of answer. Now, does anybody recall what this is for on the right side of our declaration? Notice we're always calling use state, use state, use state, use state, and then each of these has a different value inside of this use state. So what are we doing here? Does anyone remember from last time? Anybody remember? Exactly. Great answers. Yeah, 100%. So Yarmo says we're setting the initial state values. Drunk Uncle Grandma says default value. Yes, and that's exactly right. We're setting initial values. So on initial rendering of this component, the value of that state is going to be set to whatever we put here inside the parentheses. Okay? And Tame Mister went into a little bit more detail there, saying it's a hook. That's correct. It's a hook that sets the initial value of state. Exactly. Yeah. And so in this case, these initial values make sense to the type of variable that we are initializing. So for an answer, which is what the user is typing in the box, we set use state to be an empty string. Makes sense. And then when we want to update that as the user is typing, we're going to repeatedly call set answer, which is going to update that state value based on whatever the user is typing. And for an error value, right? We hopefully want that default value to be null. We want there to be no errors existing. But if we get an error, then we would call set error and update that with whatever the error value is. And then finally for status, this particular one has a few different possible values it could be, but by default we set it to typing, which then configures the UI to allow the user to type inside the box and submit. That means the box is not disabled. The user is entering their answer, and then as soon as they click that submit button, I'll reset this. As soon as they click that submit button, so initial value typing, and then we click submit, then it changes the state to submitting, and then it changes it to whatever the wrong answer value is. What would the world be like without React hooks? Yeah, React hooks are pretty great, right? It makes it very easy to set up all these possible states for your components. Hey, Kasava, how's it going? Now, Drunk Uncle Grandma, what is SME? Enlighten me. So with all these states, we expect that, we're going to have an initial value, but then that value can and will be updated at some point. Now, once that value is updated, once that value can be updated at any point, once the code is finished updating, or sorry, once the code is finished executing, then the component will re-render with that updated state value, and so the UI will look different. Oh, I see. I got you, Junk Grandma. So Ty says, when the button in the text box is unavailable for a moment, is that a separate state or some sort of transition? Yeah, great question. So let's look at that. Let's find it. So if we look, um, let's see, where is the trigger here? So we can see here, here's our function for handle submit, and it takes in a value of E. So what does that tell us? What does this E value signify for us? When generally in JavaScript in general, when you see an E or the word event, yeah, it's an event, right, of some kind. And so what usually triggers an event to be passed into a function? What let's work backwards. If I see E or event being passed into a function, what usually causes that? Yeah, on click, right? And more generically, what is on click? Yeah, exactly. It's an event handler. Exactly right. Yep. So something is triggering on handle submit to fire, and I think it's a pretty good guess that it's clicking the submit button, right? So we know we're in the right place to answer that question about what happens when we click submit and the text box goes all weird looking and the button becomes unavailable, right? So let's see what's happening here. Let's see what's happening here. So first thing we do is we say prevent default. Um, now prevent default is, does anybody remember what that's doing? What's prevent default doing? This one's really important. When you're using React, it's important to know what this is and what it does. Smurf's cousin, the event handler. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's stopping the page from, in this case, it's stopping the page from refreshing, because when we look at HTML forms, the default behavior of an HTML form is to refresh the page when you click the submit button. We don't want that to happen. So first thing we do is suppress this default behavior. The next thing we do is call set status to submitting. Aha. So Ty, I will ask you to see if you can answer your own question there. When the button in text box is unavailable for a moment, is that a separate state or some sort of transition? So what are we doing here based on kind of what we talked about already? We're calling set status. And then based on what we talked about, what do you think that does? Yeah, it's part of our status state, right? We're calling set status, which is this function right here, and it updates our status state from typing to submitting. And then down here, you can also see where we go to, if it was the right answer, then set status is success. If it was the wrong answer, then we throw this error message right here, and we set status back to typing, right? So these are just different possible state values for that status state. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly, Ty, you got it. And how that works with the UI is down here in our return. Down here in our return. Oh, and thank you for the follows, by the way, Muzakis and Kai Londo. Thank you. Um, so down here we can see how state actually affects the UI and causes those changes. So here in our text area box, in our text box right here, we have a disabled attribute, that's just a thing that text boxes have. You can disable a text box by default. Disabled checks to see whether the status is currently in submitting status. So that status state is in submitting status. Man, this is like a tongue twister, I tell you guys. And so if that is, and really this is just a true or false, right? This is a Boolean. It's a Boolean. It's either going to be true or false. And so if status is submitting, this gets set to true, and then disabled becomes true. And so that turns off the text box. And it's the same for the button as well. So that's how state is directly influencing the way our UI displays. Now, this is where the declarative thing comes in, right? We're basically just saying, hey, disable the disabled property or attribute of this text area should be controlled by the state, and that's all that we need to do, right? We don't need to go through each possible value and say true, false, true, false, true, false. Really, it's just one check against state. State is going to change automatically based on the stuff we said before. And so really it's a very simple control to turn our text box on and off and our button on and off. And so that makes this kind of UI configuration a lot easier because we can have that status state controlling both our text box and our button at the same time, right? Once state gets updated, it's going to influence how that text box and button look at the same time without us having to do any special checks on both the text box and the button. It's just going to influence both of them all at once. And so that's the power of state. So I'm glad you asked that question. That's a great example. Guy Wando says, here for React Sunday. Absolutely. Thank you for the follow, XDD Go. I'm going to hydrate real quick. So that's kind of the basics of state. And when we were doing the challenges last week, we had some really good discussions on when you're creating state variables, what do you need to do, right? What do you need? How do you create those variables? How do you know which ones to create? How many should you make? How granular should your state be, right? If I have, I think in the example that the challenge example that we did, there was a picture box and a background. And what we wanted to do was toggle between highlighting the picture box and then highlighting the background. And it was on an either or situation. And so the question was, do we need a state for the picture box on and off? And do we need a state for the background on and off? They're two separate things, right? So does that mean we need two separate state variables? Well, in the case of that specific example, the answer was no, because it was an either or situation. If the background was highlighted, the picture could not and should not ever be highlighted. If the picture was highlighted, the background could not and should not ever be highlighted. So those two elements, even though they're different, right? They still influence each other. And so if we had two state variables, one for the background and one for the picture, and they were mutually exclusive of each other, it's possible that something could go wrong and cause the picture and the background state variables to both be set to true, right? And that's not something we ever want. So if you have a single state variable controlling both of them, then you have a true proper toggle where they can never both be true. It's either true, background is highlighted, or false, picture highlighted, or whatever, however we set it up. I don't remember. So those are the types of questions that you ask yourself when you're thinking about state. And I really like in the recap down here, they just break down each of the 5 steps that you think about when setting up state. First you identify all possible states that your UI could be in. Uh, Initial load, typing, submitting, error, no error. You just thinking through all the potential possibilities of the way your UI could look. Then you determine what triggers those changes. Maybe it's a user submission, a click, a hover. Maybe it's something coming back, like a response coming back from the server, right? The server gives an error. You want to make sure you display that error, or redirect the user somewhere else, right? And then you model your states with use state, like we talked about. So then basically this step, it basically just means stop with the design phase and go into, how do I write this out with code, right? How do I use state and the const whatever set, setting all those things up. You set up all your states, and then you look at all the possible states and take out the ones that maybe you don't need. So an example of that might be, for example, you're thinking about, I think actually in one of the examples that we did last time, we built, they asked us to take this like entry form or whatever and convert it to React. And so I'm just going to look at the solution here to show you what I mean. So you might think here that, so the way this is supposed to work is you enter a first name, you enter a last name, and then down here it displays the first and the last name. And then if you edit, you can do that, and you can see it's updating as we type, right? And I can change the last name. There we go. And it's updated both the first name and the last name. And I can toggle the profile editor on and off as well. So some of the states that you might think you might need would be, obviously some kind of a toggle to turn the editor on and off. But then when we're looking at the name, we see we have a first name. So that feels like a state. We have a last name, which could also change independently of the first name. It doesn't matter what the first name is, right? But what about the full name? Because that changes too, right? So do we need a state for that? The first name is changing, the last name is changing. Those two are independent, mutually exclusive of each other. So they need their own states. The profile editor, toggle on and off, that needs a state. What about the full name? Does that need a state? What do we think? Does that need its own state? There's no wrong answers. Mm. But it's changing, right? It's a thing that changes. And we talked about how if your UI is displaying differently, if this is going to change the way the UI looks. So why doesn't it need its own state? Why doesn't it need its own state? Third Decade says, "Is that the event handler?" I'm not sure if you're talking about the button, then it has an on-click event handler. Yeah. Ah, Kailando says, because we use the states of others. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't need its own state. It doesn't need its own state because it would be redundant, right? We can get the same result by taking the first name and the last name and just putting them together. And if this had its own state, if we were updating this and saving it separately from the first name and the last name, there's a potential that this could somehow get out of sync with the first name and the last name that we're typing, right? There's a potential that if we didn't do it right, that what should I say? In honor of Rufio, I'll do Mayan bird. But yeah, if we had this as a separate state, there's the potential that it could somehow get out of sync with the last name, and that's not what we want. We want them to work together. And Kasava says, if you can use one state for multiple things, then it's easier. Yeah. So not only is it easier, it's more accurate, because if that one state can control multiple things accurately, then your user interface is never going to get out of sync, right? And Yarmo says the user doesn't interact with it directly. I mean, that's true, yes. But there can be other types. There can be other states where the user doesn't interact with it. It could be influenced by the server, the response you get back from the server. That has nothing to do with the user. So it's not always user interaction that influences it. It's more about how you want your UI to look given a certain response. That's whatever triggers that certain response. How you want your UI to look. And also, like Kosova said, it's easier if you can use existing states to influence another outcome. And it's also more accurate, right? It's more accurate. You're not going to get those weird syncing issues and get a lot of extra complication that you don't need. So essentially, that's what we're going to be talking about today. we're gonna talk a little bit more about how we determine how our state should look. How many variables do we need? How do we fix like a component that's not working properly, that where the state isn't doing what we expect it to? How do we fix that? Because I mean, it's pretty much a given that you're going to make mistakes when you're thinking about state. It's a new way of thinking, and it's not familiar to us, and so we might get it wrong on the first try. So how do we figure out how to improve state, and then how to troubleshoot states that aren't working correctly? So that's kind of the focus today. I know that was a long preamble to get up to what we're actually talking about, but it's really important that we understand what state is and how we use it before we get into the nitty gritty here. All right. So, any questions? Feel free, and also feel free to ask questions at any time. If you're new to the stream, I'm always happy to answer questions. Never a bad thing. All right. So, let's talk about state structure. So, structuring state well can make a difference between a component that is pleasant to modify and debug and one that is a constant source of bugs. Here's some tips you should consider while structuring state. And today we're going to talk about when you should use a single variable versus multiple variables, kind of like the conversation we just had, right? When should you use a single variable to influence the behavior of a lot of different UI elements versus multiple variables to hold different data to influence multiple elements? What to avoid when organizing state, and how to fix common issues with structure. So, some basic principles for structuring state. When you write a component that holds some state, you'll have to make choices about how many state variables to use and what the shape of their data should be. While it's possible to write correct programs even with a suboptimal state structure, there's a few principles that can guide you to make better choices. And that's an important point, right? You're not going to get it right the first time, and it might even work just fine for most cases. So you might not see a problem with state right away. Um, that's why testing is important. Like with any application, if you're going to have, if it's going to be actually used in production, you should have thorough testing. You should try different use cases against it, and you should really do the best due diligence you can before releasing something into production. That's just a good general rule of thumb for any application. Um, so main principles are grouping related state. If you always update two or more state variables at the same time, consider merging them into a single state variable. And that's kind of what we saw with with that form that we looked at in the previous example. We saw there was that form where you could type in an answer to that country and then click the submit button, and then the text box would change, and then it would give you the right answer or the wrong answer. And in that case, you have a lot of things happening at once. So the initial draft version of that had separate states for typing, separate states for right answer, wrong answer, error, a bunch of different states. But all of those would be getting flipped at the same time every time an interaction took place. And so instead of having individual states, we grouped them together into a single status state variable. The next principle is to avoid contradictions. So when the state is structured in a way that several pieces of state may contradict and disagree with each other, you leave room for mistakes. Try to avoid this. And so that's the example that we talked about with the background and picture highlighting example. There was a discussion about why don't we need separate state variables for the picture that we're highlighting and for the background that we're highlighting. But as we talked about, it's possible that something could go wrong in our logic. And at some point, both the background and the picture could be unhighlighted, or both of them could be highlighted. And that's not something we want. So we don't want any disagreements or contradictions. And then avoid redundant state. I'll hide right here. If you can calculate some information from the component's props or its existing state variables during rendering, you should not put that information into the component's state. And that's basically what we talked about with the first and last name example. So where you're typing in, first name and then last name, and y'all were right on the money that we don't need a separate state for the first and last name together because we can get it from the first name and the last name and just concatenate them. It's easy to do. It keeps everything in sync. We won't have any potential of getting things, out of order. So we're avoiding redundant state that way. And then avoiding duplication. So when the same data is duplicated between multiple state variables or within nested objects, it's difficult to keep them in sync. Reduce duplication when you can. And that kind of goes back to, grouping related state, right? These are kind of similar in that if you have duplicate values being stored at different points, it's probably something you can group together. And then avoid deeply nested state. So, deeply hierarchical state is not very convenient to update. When possible, prefer to structure state in a flat way. Um, so, yeah, I mean, you don't want to get your state spread all over parents and children. You want to kind of group things together, and then you can trickle that state down to children if you need to. So, basically, the underlying principle here is make it easy to update without making mistakes. Um, and so removing redundant and duplicate data from state helps ensure that all the pieces stay in sync, right? And that's the main goal, right? We want to unify how the user interface looks to the people who are interacting with it. So if I click, if I enter a bunch of form data and I click submit, that form better respond in a way that makes sense. It better, highlight any fields that I didn't fill out correctly, and it should highlight them all at the same time. It should understand, what fields are wrong, what fields are right. If I did get all the fields right, it should, immediately re-render the page to give me the appropriate display if I've just logged in or something. And so basically everything just needs to stay in sync so that the UI updates correctly and never becomes confusing for the user. And this is similar to how a database engineer might want to normalize the database structure to reduce the chance of bugs. This is something that I see a lot when working with databases, is that you might have like a bunch of different tables, and some of them have the exact same field in them. And sometimes those fields can contain different data for like the same record. And so, how do you know which one is actually the truth? You don't. You have to go back and validate. You have to be like, well, okay, maybe this one's not never been used. This one's all nulls. I shouldn't use this one. And so, normalization is important when you're looking at databases. It doesn't always happen, and sometimes it can't happen. But it's very similar when we're talking about state. You just don't want things clashing. And man, I've seen a lot of non-normalized data lately in my day job. Oh boy, some really massive tables with a ton of duplication. It's fun stuff. All right. So, how does this actually look? So, the first principle we talked about was grouping related state. So, you might sometimes be unsure between using a single or multiple state variables. Should you do this? So, in this first example, we're setting a state variable for x, coordinate x, and then we have our set function, and then we set our initial value as 0, and then y, set y, and 0. So how that would look then would just be, coordinates of 0, 0, if we were plotting that on a graph, right? Or alternatively, we could have a single state variable called position, call our set position function, and whenever we want to update it, and then set the initial value to an object which contains both values. That could also work, right? This is just a consolidated version of what was up here. And it says technically you could use either one, right? But if two variables always change together, it might be a good idea to unify them into a single state variable. Then you won't forget to always keep them in sync, like in this example where moving the cursor updates both coordinates of the red dot. Now, I love this example. This is like one of my favorite ones in the docs so far, because it's just cool. Watch this. Ooh, I don't know. I love that. Kylondo, I'm glad you're impressed because I was. I don't know. I just think it's really neat. And on my screen too, the frame rate on the Twitch stream isn't perfect, but it's really instantaneous. It follows my cursor. Um, and so, what is happening here? Well, every time, every time I move my cursor, we are resetting the state. So think about how often that's happening. We're resetting the state and we're re-rendering the component. It's happening instantaneously. And so we can see here what's happening is literally on pointer move. So every time my mouse moves at all, anytime it twitches, then we call set position and we update the current coordinates of the dot. And then we pass those coordinates into our div. And this div is essentially the red dot, right? So I don't know. I think that's pretty neat. It shows how powerful React can be in that this is not like an animation. We are taking a React component and re-rendering it, a bajillion times a second or whatever, as every time my cursor moves. Yeah, all of this is with state. Yep, right here. See? So let's look at that again, how that works. State, the coordinates of the red dot are started out at here in the top right corner because that's x0, y0. And when we're looking at a canvas, that's x0, y0 is up here. And then every time the cursor moves, on pointer move. So what is this? What category of thing is this? On pointer move. Yeah, exactly. It's an event handler, right? So on pointer move, it captures that. It says, oh no, the pointer moved, right? It calls set position to update the coordinates to be wherever the mouse cursor is currently located. So if I sneak in here from the bottom, boop, boop, right? It's updating the state, it's updating the coordinates to wherever my cursor currently is. And it does that as long as the cursor is moving. It's just repeatedly triggers this event handler, which then calls the set position function, resets the coordinates to from whatever they were before to whatever they are now. Third Decade asks, what's the smallest pointer move length? I don't know, but I think it's pixel. I think it's pixel perfect because I'm literally like moving it the smallest possible amount I can, and it's the little dot is twitching, so it must be pixel perfect. But I don't know. And so that's how powerful state is. And that's why I love this example because it's very dramatic and I don't know, it just shows you how cool it is. So one state per pixel. Yeah, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think when we're talking about X and yeah, I don't know if I guess X and Y refers to, I don't know what the units of distance are on our canvas here. So we're doing a transform here. We're setting position. I'm gonna fork this real quick. Setting our position. Yeah, it's okay. Here, it's pixels. So you see there, it's doing a translation. It's setting the position, whatever the current coordinates are, and then it's doing it by pixels. So yeah, that makes sense. Set the pointer to a red dot with a cat following it. You could do that, right? And what you would do is you would have still probably a single state, and I'm thinking you could maybe set the cat to trail like X pixels behind the red dot, right? You could have the cat be following like 10 pixels behind, and then just have it chase. So you'd have to set up your translation of the cat to have a offset of however many pixels you wanted But yeah, you could definitely do that. And you could have it all be controlled by that single position state tracking the cursor. So yeah, I love this. I love this example. It's my favorite one so far, just because it really illustrates how cool state is. But anyway, in this case, we were able to make the position into a single state variable, which controls both x and y because they work together, right? Because they work together, you're never going to have like you're never going to have a point where you don't want both coordinates to be checked. Um, when your mouse moves, you're going to always want to check both coordinates, and so a single state variable is appropriate here. You never want those two to get out of sync and stop following the cursor. Drunk Uncle says, "I better get a fat cat on its belly, changing its face direction to follow." I think that's more realistic. Absolutely. Yeah. So, another case where you'll group data into an object or an array is when you don't know how many pieces of state you'll need. So, for example, it's helpful when you have a form where the user can add custom fields. Yeah. So, thinking about like, some of those stupid hiring sites where they make you enter all of your education and stuff like manually, and you have to click add another, add another, add another, right? That could be a point where you want to capture that information in state, but you don't know exactly what the limit is going to be. So you could just group all those fields together in an object and just have something when they click that add another education button. You would have it add an additional item to that state object. Garfield. Yeah. Or add another task. Absolutely, Kai. Yep. Yep. So if your state variable is an object, remember that you can't update only one field in it without explicitly copying the other fields. For example, you can't do set position x equals 100 in the above example because it would not have the y property at all. Instead, if you wanted to set x alone, you would either do set position and then you're just breaking apart that position object. So that what you would take, essentially, you're just breaking apart the current state position, and it would, you know, preserve the current y value, and then you're explicitly updating that x value to be 100. Or you could split them into two state variables and do set x 100. Yeah. All right, so the next one here is avoiding contradictions in state. Here's a hotel feedback form with is sending and is sent state variables. So let's see how that works. All right. Very good, except for the Nazgul raid that woke me up in the middle of the night. Very screechy. Yeah. Guy says the Witch King is rude. I'm glad somebody got it. All right, so let's see what happens when we click the send button. Now that should be interacting with these two state variables here, right? Is sending and then is sent. So let's see what happens. Sending and then is sent, right? So we could very clearly see what happens there. The sending was triggered while that form was being submitted, and then is sent is what triggers this feedback message here. So down here on our handle submit function, we're essentially saying, all right, update is sending to true. We're awaiting the actual send message. And then we're also updating is sending to false right after that. And then at the same time, flipping is sent to true, right? So if this submission is successful right here, the next thing we're doing is turning off the sending because it's done. We don't need it anymore. Turn that off. And then set is sent to true at the same time. So we're essentially doing a toggle here, right? We're toggling from sending to sent, but yet we have to do two separate operations here. We're triggering two booleans. And Kai says, what would be the benefit of is sending for the benefit of the user? Yeah, essentially, basically, you never want the user to, if something's going to take a couple seconds, which it probably will if you are interacting with a database or local storage, well, more like a database. If you're interacting with a database out in the cloud somewhere, there's the potential that that message could take a while to send. It could take a while to get a response. It could ultimately be unsuccessful. There's a lot of things that could happen there. So while we are awaiting this send message operation, we want to have some kind of transitionary status, right? We want to alert the user that our form is doing something, and that could be a spinner. Sometimes you get a spinner. Sometimes you get a status bar, a loading bar, right? And who cares whether it's accurate or not? It could be that you've hard coded a timeout in there to make it feel like it's taking a while. I mean, there's all sorts of things that it's all about the user psychology to say like, yes, this is working, it's doing something. I need to be patient and wait for a response, right? And I mentioned timeout because that's literally what they're doing here. There's a timeout encoded into this to make it's only interacting with like local storage or whatever, but it's mimicking how you would interact with a database and in programming in that delay of a couple seconds. So, and there could be reasons that you want to do that. But anyway, that's so what you can see here is that we definitely want that is sending to be triggered somehow, but this is feeling a little bit redundant in the fact that we're essentially flipping a toggle, but to do that we have to interact with two different states. It doesn't feel good. You could potentially mangle your interface accidentally. So it does say the matrix does not want you to know how fast it is. Yeah, sometimes I get that feeling from certain sites. It's like, there's a spinner and I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is a timeout that they've encoded in here to like always take 2 seconds because they want you to feel like it's really working. It's really thinking about your data, especially on those silly like quiz sites and stuff like that. They're like processing your answers. It's like, yeah, that doesn't take that long. It's not thinking that hard. uh, And Kai says, I read a while ago that UX design showing the user that their task is being worked on makes them more patient. Yeah, absolutely. I would say that's 100% true. Because if it just like freezes on you or even worse, leaves all the form elements like to the point where you can interact with them, people are just going to start clicking on stuff, and then that's going to screw things up entirely. So you want to make sure that you're telling them, hey, we're working on it. It's okay. Wait a couple seconds. We'll be done soon. Yeah, or you could get that day where the load is heavy and you don't expect that it should be fast. Absolutely. We value your input. Here's a GIF, right? Loading. Yeah. We are button pushing monkeys. Absolutely. That's why the user experience is important and you shouldn't neglect it. All right. So, this code here, where we're interacting with these two states at the same time, it says, well, this code works. It does, right? Nothing wrong with it. It works. It leaves the door open for impossible states. For example, if you forget to call set is sent and is sending together, like they're doing here, you might end up with in a situation where both is sending and is sent are true at the same time, right? And that's going to royally screw up your UI. So the more complex your component is, the harder it is to understand what has happened. Yeah, which is absolutely true, right? We've got and also, this complexity means that if you accidentally say forget to call is sent, then let's just do that. Let's forget to call is sent. So I'm going to actually reset this. All right. Do that. Take this out. And we'll add a test value in here and click send. Oh, see? That's not good, right? I have no idea whether my form was submitted or not. No clue. Did it work? Did it not? I don't know, it disappeared into the ether. Now, it actually did work, but I have no way of knowing that because I didn't update all of my states. And same thing here. We'll do this. Oh, I need to reset it. Sorry. I need to re-render. Boop, boop. There we go. All right. That. Okay, so well, that I guess that actually did work, did it? But it didn't. It still triggered the sending. Oh no, that because that's up here. So at this point, and this is where it gets confusing, right? Is sent true triggers the UI to look like this, but our is sending state is still set to true. So they are both true right now, and we don't know it. So that's the hard thing to kind of like, yeah, if you've got too much state, it becomes hard to remember what status everything is in. So that's what they're essentially what they're saying here. So to reduce this confusion, we should replace those two separate states with one status variable that could take three valid states: typing, which is the initial one where you're entering information, sending, and sent. It couldn't be more than one at the same time. Drunk says, I thought you made that test. I didn't realize the Lord of the Rings reference was an example. Nope, this is in the official React docs, baby. Yeah, it's great. They have a lot of little subtle pop culture things in here. It's pretty good. I like their style. But the important thing here is that none of those pop culture references reduce our understanding at all. They're just fun to have. They don't obscure the content. All right, so how would we do that with a single state? Well, this is kind of similar to the example we looked at before. Um, Essentially, we're just calling, every time something changes, we're just calling set status and just updating it to whatever the appropriate value should be. So while it's sending, it's sending. And then as soon as it's done, it's sent. Right? And we have a couple of checks here to basically say, hey, set our is sending status to true or false based on the status of the status state. I gotta stop using so many S's. And so we're setting these Booleans here, but that's okay because they're always going to be managed by our singular state value, right? So we can still have regular variables and kind of split our state out a little bit, but it's all being managed appropriately by that single state variable. So down here, we can use our is sending Booleans to control how our text area and button display, what our form does. And then you can see down here, they set a timeout to delay the form response. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense why we did that, because it helps us, cut down on confusion and potential conflicts. Just makes it easier to parse as well, to understand. And it says here you can still declare some constants for readability, which is what they did, but they're not state variables. So you don't need to worry about them getting out of sync with each other, right? Because they are managed by our state variable. So the next principle here is we want to also, we're about ready for a break. I think this is a good break point. So when we come back, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about redundant state. And some of these things are similar in like you could maybe ascribe this example to redundancy as well, right? Those states didn't need to exist; they could be combined into one. But these are all sort of important things to consider when we're thinking about state in general. You don't have to necessarily bucket them in one way or another. Set timeout, resolve, time of director's cut of Lord of the Rings trilogy. Oh man, we would be here all day. But I mean, if the task was actually to then go watch the director's cut of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I would be okay with that. All right, so we're going to take 5 minutes, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about avoiding redundant state. Okay, so during the break, please do get up, go hydrate. I'm going to get some more hydration here. I am out. So I will see you all back here in 5 minutes. Oh, come on. Google Timer is gone again. Google, what are you doing? Where is Google Timer? No. What is what is going on? Google, what are you doing? 5 minute timer. Google. Oh, thank goodness. There, it's back. Google shouldn't do that to me. All right. I'll reset it. I'll see y'all back here in 5. Someone make a front end React this local storage 5 minute timer. Yeah, we should, just so I never have to deal with the stupid Google timer going away again. Sounds like a plan. Maybe that's what we'll do after we're done with the docs. Maybe we'll build our own timer. All right, I'll see you back here soon. All right, so we've still got about a minute and 30 seconds left in the break, but I do have something I want to show you guys when we get back. Um, you know how, like, in Japan, they have like Kit Kats and all sorts of crazy flavors? Well, it's coming to America too. Not in Kit Kat form, but in Twizzler form. So I have something I can't wait to show you. It's just the wildest thing, and I love it so much. Oh, thank you for the follow there. Want to try? And Fezzing Frog, I'm glad you're excited to hear about Twizzlers. Thank you guys for the follows. All right, about a minute left. So get your hydration squared away. Use the bathroom. Pet your dog, pet your cat, pet your significant other with their permission, and then come on back. If you didn't get up during the break, or if you're able to, please do get up and stretch, roll your wrists, roll your neck. Don't get carpal tunnel. I believe in you. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the timer because by the time I get my camera back on, it will have counted down anyway. So, alrighty, and we are back. So, as promised, I wanted to show you these excellent Twizzlers that I picked up a while back on clearance at my local grocery store. They are key lime pie flavored Twizzlers. And the wildest part of this entire thing is that they actually taste like key lime pie, and like the filling is like the graham cracker crust. It's super weird, and I love them. Um, yeah. So anyway, look for key lime pie Twizzlers at your local grocery store. They're super weird. Yeah, I know. I know. I love key lime pie. It's my favorite dessert is key lime pie. Like aside from like chocolate or whatever, but my favorite like dessert is key lime pie. And so when I saw these, I absolutely had to buy them. But I was like, there's no way they're actually going to taste like key lime pie, and they do. They taste like key lime pie, and the filling in the center is like graham crackery crust. It's so weird. They're great. Yeah. Um, Glad you like them, Kosovo. I'm not sponsored by Twizzler, by the way. Just putting that out there. That was an independent promotion. Okay, so um, they also came up with Coca-Cola flavored Tic Tacs. Aren't Tic Tacs like supposed to like freshen your breath? Why would I want my breath to taste like sugary soda and like, oh, that's really weird. I gotta find some. When I used to work in an office, like now I work from home, so all my coworkers are remote. But when I used to work in an office, I would always go to the grocery store and like look in the clearance racks, and I would find the weirdest candy that I could, and I would bring it into work and like put it on like the community area, and just so people could try it. I would just find whatever the weirdest flavor or candy or I don't know, weird thing that didn't sell. I would buy those and I would put them out in the community area. And so when I saw those key lime Twizzlers, I was like, yes, weird candy. So many questions of how and why, what they used. Yeah, right? Third Decade says, did you get that in Japan? Are you talking about the Twizzlers or the Tic Tacs? The Twizzlers I got at my local Midwest grocery store. I don't know how they got there. Now the Harry Potter jelly beans, I mean, those are like a literary reference, so I get that. But like just I don't know, regular candy, just out there in the world, just all the weirdest flavors. I don't know. But yeah, I know Japan does some wild stuff with like Kit Kats and other things, just insane flavor combinations. So it was odd to see it in my Midwestern grocery store. So Frank Lee actually has a great comment here about state in general and how we want to make state, how we want to be very careful in how we design state. So they say, as a PLC programmer, we used a state machine for all industrial objects like machines and motors, etc. Yeah, that's very important to have appropriate state for those for when you actually have a mechanical object, which is going to be triggered to a certain configuration based on what inputs it gets. So the states were idle, started, running, paused, stopped, and aborted. Yeah, absolutely. You would never want, for example, you would never want that machine to be in, um, you know, running and stopped status at the same time, right? That would be bad. You could have certain components that would keep running, certain components that would stop. That would just not be a good thing at all. So that's an excellent real world example of um, being careful with state and having a single state that controls all of those statuses, or a single state variable, I guess, that controls all of those statuses. Yeah. So I thank you for that, frankly. That's an excellent example of real world example where, yeah, where state is used. All right, so let's talk about redundant state. If you can calculate some information from the component's props or its existing state variables during rendering, you should not put that information into the component's state. So let's look at that again. So if you can calculate some information from the component's props, now remember what the word props means. What are props? We haven't talked about props in a while, so while you answer that, I'm gonna get a Twizzler. That was a little chewier than I anticipated, but it was delicious. Um, yeah, so I mean, properties technically, yes, but where do we use props? Like, what are they for when we're talking about React? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so data passing from a parent to a child component, right? We can reference a component using the the caret notation, right? We can reference a component in a parent using the caret notation, and inside of that we can pass in specific values that we want to send from the parent to the child, and those are called props. And props are stored in an object, right, which we can then destructure in the child in order to pull out specific values that we need in that child. I put some of these descriptions in the chat GPT, prefaced with explain this to me like I'm 5 years old. Yeah, absolutely, that's a great way to do it. ChatGPT wrote the tweet that announced this stream today, so it's helpful for a lot of things. Thank you for the follow there, Ralph, for one. So that's what props are. If you need a deeper dive into props, if you didn't hear about them the first time around, we covered them in some past streams. So feel free to check those out. But anywho, yeah, props are what can be passed from parent component to child component, and then used to influence behavior inside that child component. So what they're saying here is if you can calculate some information from the component's props, so what's being passed into it from a parent, or its existing state variables during rendering, you should not put that information into that component's state. So, like, don't add a new state variable just to hold information from props. So, for example, and we'll talk about why that is in a second. For example, take this form. It works, but can you find any redundant state in it? So let's look what they have here. So we're not really gonna focus on the return value down here. We're gonna focus on what is up here. Okay, so check you in. So we can say this is similar to the other example we looked at before, right? Um, oh, okay. We've got first name, we've got last name, and we've got full name. I wonder what the answer to this question is. I wonder where the redundant state could be. It's not like it's something we just talked about, right? Anybody remember? What do you think this redundant state might be? And what they're doing here is they're taking first name in the input box, last name in the input box, in this input box, and then ticket will be issued to full name, right? So in this case, as we talked about before, right, the full name is redundant because we can get exactly the same thing from the first name and the last name and just concatenate them together. So how fortuitous that we talked about that already. This form has this form has three state variables: first name, last name, and full name. However, full name is redundant. You can always calculate full name from first name and last name during render, so we remove it from state, right? And we already know how you can do it. You just concatenate first name and last name together with a space between them. There you go. That's all you need. And with full name, we can put it in just a regular old variable. It doesn't need to be its own state variable because it's being managed by first name and last name. And so full name will never get out of sync because it's being directly managed by first name and last name. Okay. And Drunk Uncle Grandma says, I've been meaning to check out CatGPT where they respond to your answers as a cat. Wouldn't everything just be meow? How does that work? I'll have to check that out if it exists. All right. It's calculated during render. We talked about that. Meow, hiss, catnip. So as a result, the change handlers don't need to do anything special to update it. When you call set first name or set last name, you trigger a re-render, and then the next full name will be calculated from the fresh data. Yeah, and so that's important to remember. So whenever you call a set function on a state value, that immediately queues up a re-render. So it doesn't do it right away, but as soon as all of the code in that component is finished executing, if you have called a set, it will then say, oh, you've updated the state value. I'm going to re-render this component for you. Now, if you call set early on and then try to do like a console log on the state value later on in the same component, you won't see a difference. You won't see that change because the set doesn't trigger the re-render until all the code is finished executing for that component. So we saw some examples of that last week, I think, where that can kind of trip you up if you're not careful. If you call set at the beginning of the component, expecting your state to then be updated for the rest of the component, that's not going to work. So that set will not actually take place until the component re-renders after the whole thing is finished executing. Hey, D Home. Welcome to the stream. Thank you for the follow, Zed Pirate Roberts. I like that name. That's great. So yeah, calling set will trigger a re-render, and then the next full name will be calculated from the fresh data on that next render. Now we have a little digression here about don't mirror props in state, right? Because that was the other thing they said not to do. They said don't create a state value that could otherwise be calculated based on other state variables that already exist. And then also don't mirror props in state. Now, why is that? Why couldn't I create a state variable for an existing prop? So here's an example of some redundant state code. Here we have a function or a component called message. And real quick pop quiz. How do I know that this is a component and not a regular function? It says function, right? How do I know it's a component? A React component specifically. What's my key identifier? Yeah. Uppercase, baby. Exactly. Yep. Uppercase is what tells React that this is a component and not a function. Because you can still have regular functions in React, right? It is, it's just fancy JavaScript. So you can still have regular JavaScript functions, but this uppercase letter tells us it's a component. And then we are passing a prop into this component called message color. And so what they've done here is created a new state called color. And then for the initial value, we're setting it to a prop, the prop that we just passed in. That looks like it might work. Fancy, yeah. That looks like it might work, right? It's like technically correct, the best kind of correct, I guess. The construction looks good. So here, a color state variable is initialized to the message color prop. The problem is that if the parent component passes a different value of message color, so if a new prop, like if it goes from red, if this prop goes from red to blue, the color state variable would not be updated. The state is only initialized during the first render, right? We're setting the initial value to whatever prop is there at the time. And if that prop changes, this will not update. Why? What would I need to do if I wanted it to update? This initial, if it, on first render, this color state will be initialized to whatever prop is currently there at that time. If this prop changes, there's no re-render. Why? Yeah, right, exactly, Kasava. I would need to call set color to re-render if that, if this were to change. So it's an extra complication, right? It's and that would be easy to not do that accidentally and then wonder why I'm passing in different colors and my component isn't changing because I didn't tell it to. I didn't tell it to set color to the new prop. So there's really no need to do that. That's not something we should be doing. The prop should directly control the if we're getting a prop from a parent to a child, that prop should have direct control over the child's behavior. We should never have this unexpected weirdness of trying to coordinate a prop into a state variable. It's just not going to be what we want to do. And so instead, what you should do is use the message color prop. Just use it directly. No need to create this weird artificial middleman of a state variable that you have to then update separately. There's no need. We already have a prop. It's going to control behavior just like we want it to. And so we can just do this. Pass in the message color prop and then assign it to a const if we want to. This way it won't get out of sync with the prop passed from the parent component. So mirroring props into state only makes sense when you want to ignore all updates for a specific prop. So if you always want to just capture that initial value and not take in any subsequent props. By convention, if you want to do this, you would start your prop name with initial or default to clarify that its new values are ignored. Now, I can't really think of any good examples of why you would want to do that unless you were implementing some kind of like a snapshot feature, like where you wanted to have a snapshot of what the UI looked like when it was first initialized, maybe. Like for record keeping purposes. I don't know. I was trying to think of like a use case for this where you want to ignore subsequent updates and not have your UI update at all. But I don't know. Let me know if you think of any good examples of where you might want to use this initial sort of a initial setup and store that and capture that in a state variable that never updates. I don't know. Maybe like a time when the component initialized or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. Let me know if you've ever used this. If you've ever done like an initial state which you then captured and didn't update. I'm really curious. All right, so any questions here? Does this make sense why we don't want to capture prop values inside of state variables for the most part? You can think about it, and if you're not sure about it, feel free to ask. I'm happy to go over it again. Or feel free to ask questions at any time. It's all good. There's never a lot of folks think, oh, I have a stupid question, and there's never a stupid question. A lot of times, those types of questions, depending on how they're worded, can really make you think. Okay, Champo says, can you explain it again, please? Right, yes. So, whenever we declare a state variable, it has two parts, right? This is always true. It always has two parts. The first one is the variable itself, which holds the state. In this case, it's called color. So if I were to call, color at some point, I would expect to get whatever the current color state value is in that variable. That's the bucket that we put it in. Now, that value is not going to change unless I update it. And how we update state variables is by calling a specific function. It always starts with set and then the variable name. This is actually a function. And what we're doing here is we are pairing the variable and its update function together, and we are giving it an initial value. So this is like a three-part process, right? We're setting our color variable, we're declaring the function we're going to use to update it, and we're setting its initial value. Okay. And what we're doing in this specific example is we are passing a prop, passing a value of some kind, in this case a color, from the parent into our message component. And then immediately we're assigning that value to our color state variable, right? So if I pass in blue here from the parent, if I pass in blue, our color state is going to be initialized to blue. Pretty straightforward, right? However, now what happens? Yeah, no worries. But there's a second part to this, okay? What happens if I pass in red? I pass in red now as a new prop. However, if we were to execute this, what we would find is that color is still going to be set to blue. Now, why? I passed in a different color. Yeah, how come? Exactly. I passed in a different color, but this value will not change. The reason is that at no point are we updating the initial value to the new value using our set color function, right? This value right here, this value will not update unless we call set color and pass in a new value. It won't. That's how state works. This will always be the initial value unless and until we call set color. And since we didn't, no matter how many times I pass in a new color here, it's always going to be set to its initial value of blue. And that becomes very complicated very fast, right? You're going to be thinking that, oh yeah, I'm going to be triggering a change in this message component when I pass in a new color. It's not going to work. You're not going to know why. You're going to be like, what the heck? And this is called mirroring, where we are mirroring our props with, or trying to mirror our props with a state variable. And we don't need to do that. And in most cases, we shouldn't do that. When we're passing in a prop like this, we just want the component to accept that prop and update itself accordingly. We don't want there to be any kind of middleman or barrier to entry here. If I'm passing in a prop from the parent to the child, I expect that child to obey. It's like a very strict parent. If I pass in a prop from the parent to the child, that child better listen and do what I tell it to. Right? And so what you should do instead is this. You should just accept the prop and take it in and, start using it in your logic. You should not have any kind of a barrier there, such as setting a state variable. You should just say, all right, parent, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to take in this color and I'm going to start using it in my logic right away. You're not going to gatekeep it in any way with the state variable. Champo says, how would we declare the color? Would it be done earlier on? Yeah. So message color here, this is right here. This is being passed from a parent component. We don't know what that component looks like. In this example, it doesn't matter. But the parent component is what's going to be setting that value and passing it to the child. This is a child component. So that would look something like, in the parent, that would look something like, one second. What is this called? Message. And it would be, you could pass in, let's see, it'd be like message blue or something like that. Yeah. So it'd be something like this inside the parent component. I just freehanded that, so it's probably not, entirely syntactically correct, but I'm inside the parent component, I would be calling message and passing in, um, and it would be like, what is it? Message color. Message color equals blue. So that's how I would pass it from this parent component that we're in right now into the child. I would say, all right, I'm calling on message, passing in a prop of message color, and that prop equals blue. Okay? Yeah, so you're right in that the color is declared earlier on. It's declared in the parent, which then passes it down to the child as a prop. All right. Thank you for the follow, MDG Dev. Appreciate it. Third Decade says, do you agree with the Future of Life Institute's call on all AI labs to immediately pause for at least 6 months the training of AI systems more powerful than GPT-4? Yeah, so I can set up that poll during our next break, and y'all can vote in it. All right. Next topic is avoiding duplication of state. Oh, Brevity Dev, thank you for the follow. Gosh, I'm getting so many follows today. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I'm gonna hydrate here again. My voice is kind of scratchy. I don't know why. Got some sugar-free cranberry pineapple juice. It's really good. Okay, avoiding duplication in state. Tea Earl Grey hot. Okay, that's literally why I started drinking tea in the first place, was Captain Picard. I think I told you guys that already, but yeah, that's that phrase, tea Earl Grey hot. That's why I started drinking tea, because if Captain Picard drinks tea, then it must be good. So I still love it to this day. Crapple juice. It is. Oh, it's I don't know. I think it's just ocean spray. I don't remember, or it might be like whatever the store brand of ocean spray is. Um, you know, yeah, cranberry pineapple. It's good stuff, and no sugar or low sugar. I don't know, diet. Yeah, yeah. It actually has a very good flavor. Yeah, I love Earl Grey. It's great. I didn't like it at first. It took me a little while, but now I do. I love it. Natural sugars. Yeah. Incoming sponsor. Yeah, I've been dropping brand names during this stream. I don't know why. I don't normally do that. Just me itching for a sponsorship. Not really. All right. So let's talk about duplication in state. Um, this menu list component lets you choose a single travel snack out of several. All right. So you can see as I'm clicking each one, the UI is updating to reflect my choice, right? Do, 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 do. So let's see how their state looks. Now, I think for this one, I'm going to fork it because it's kind of large. So let's see how this looks. All right, what do we have here? We have initial items, and we have our 3 items: pretzels, seaweed. I love crispy seaweed, by the way. That's a great snack. Great snack. And then granola bar. Out of the 3, I think crispy seaweed is my favorite. Um, and then we have our component here, menu component, and we have 2 states. We have items and set items, and that's set to our item list here is set to our array of initial items. And then our selected item here, this is a separate state, it's set to 0. So by default, what they're saying is that we have a list of items here, it's this, and then the selected item is set to the first one by default. So if I were to reload this, there. So we can see that by default, the first item is selected because that's how we set up the state. Okay. Hasta la vista, baby ML. Thank you for the follow. Oh, Frankly says Earl Grey also makes excellent iced tea. Just add 10% sugar and cool. Yummy. It does sound good. Mind Wolf brought to you by Ocean Spray. Yeah. Hey, if they paid me, maybe. If they paid me. Isihogo, welcome. Welcome to the stream. Hello to you too. All right. So now in the return, what are they doing? We have our 2 separate states, items and set selected item. And what they're doing is they're looping through the items array and basically just saying, hey, on click. It's basically what it's doing is it's looping through the items array. It's setting up a list item for each item in the array and showing the title, putting a space, and then adding a button. And then inside our button here, on click, we're setting the selected item to whatever item was clicked, right? That's what we want. If I click this button, it should update our selected item to be whatever one we just clicked. So in this case, it's updated from 0 to 1, right? Item 1 in the array is this. I click that button. It's calling our set function to set that item value to whichever one in the array it is. In this case, it's 1. And then it says you picked selected item dot title. Okay, so I mean, I guess conceptually that makes sense, but it does feel a little weird because our items state here is really just set up based on this initial items array, right? We're never even calling set items at all. It's underlined because we didn't call it. So this feels a little weird. So maybe there's a way to consolidate this down a little bit. Also, too, I can see that selected item is basically just going into our items array and finding whichever one we're on, right? Or it's just all it's doing is it's updating itself based on the ID in our array. So let's read more and see what we can maybe do to streamline this a little bit. So currently it stores the selected item as an object in the selected item state variable, right? It's just capturing that ID. However, this is not great. The contents of the selected item is the same object as one of the items inside the items list. Now, that is right here, right? We're looking at selected item. It's capturing an ID, but we're already doing that here inside. Wow, that is interesting. Both of you asked literally the same question at the same time. Are y'all bots? Are you networked together? Did we just become best friends? I hope so. I hope you did. Are you teaching React or learning it? I'm currently teaching it, but I'm also refreshing myself on the basics. I think it's good to do that. And teaching is a great way to really figure out where your own knowledge gaps are, right? If you can't rephrase something in a way that everyone can understand it, then you don't really know it. And so it's a great way. And my chat asks great questions too, because they're excellent people. And so sometimes they ask questions that reveal gaps that I didn't even recognize. I feel a shift in the matrix. Get out of my head, Charles. Oh, X-Men reference. X-Men, is that X-Men 1 or 2? I don't remember. But yeah, nice. Early 2000s X-Men reference. Very good. And Brevity says, "Oh, you're presenting this like an instructor, just curious." Yeah, I am, but that doesn't mean you can't ask questions. Um, and so that's what I'm doing. All right. So again, we have two states here, but one of them, this second one right here, is literally capturing something that we already have. We're already holding it in our initial items array, right? So it's redundant. But why does that matter? Let's make each item editable. So I'm going to fork this as well. We'll look at it over here. All right. So we've made each item editable. Now we can change the name. Choose. There we go. And okay, so that seems to work decently enough. All right. And really the only change they've made here is they're just calling set items, and taking the title based on whatever the user has entered. So if we click on choose, if we first click choose on item and then edit it, we notice that the input updates, but the label at the bottom does not reflect the edits, right? And that's true, right? We saw that when I changed this from whatever it was, it doesn't matter, to cheese, which is by far the superior snack. I think it was pretzels. I don't know, but let's change it back. All right, so pretzels, I've updated it, but down here, this still says cheese. I have to click on choose. I have to choose to ignore the cheese and click pretzels, and now it updates back. So what's happening there? Well, what that's saying to us in general is that our selected item state is not staying in sync with the actual values in the items array. So our selected item, which tells us, what gets displayed down here, that state is not being updated properly to stay in sync with what's in our items array. This is a bit of a mind bender, but we'll go over it again. So if you first click choose on an item and then edit it, the input updates, but the label at the bottom does not reflect the edits. This is because you have duplicated state and we didn't update selected item. We never called set selected item to update it properly. It's still holding the old value in its state. Although you could update selected item too, an easier fix is to just remove the duplication. We don't need it. In this example, instead of a selected item object, which creates a duplication with the objects inside items, you could hold that ID in state and then get the selected item by searching the items array for the item with that ID. Wow, that was a confusing sentence. So let's just see how they did it, okay? I feel like this is one that's better observed than read because that's kind of garbage. All right, let's look at it. So what did they do instead? It ain't easy being cheesy. I say that all the time. Like literally that comes out of my mouth. It ain't easy being cheesy. Truer words were never spoken. Thank you, Chester Cheetah. All right. What did they do? So our initial items array remains the same. And now, let's see, what did they do here? Make sure I get the right one. I did fork the right one, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Okay, perfect. Just double checking. All right. We still have our menu and we set initial items. And we still have our selected ID and we set that to 0. But note that instead of digging into the array again, we're just setting this to be a numeric value. Now, in order to determine the selected items, we simply go into our item array, find the appropriate item, and check and see if that item ID is equal to whatever we've selected. So all we're doing here is we're saying, all right, I've clicked on this button to select something, and we want to find which one it is. And so that's what they did here. Thank you, Propaganda Overlord. Thank you for the follow. And now for the display value, what we're doing instead is on click, whenever we click a button. So let's see, I update this to crackers. Yeah, now I'm going to choose a different one here. Sorry, let's do this one more time. Cheez-Its. All right, perfect. So that seems to work. Now, whenever I click that choose button, it sets the selected ID to whatever the ID of the item is in the array itself. We never want to store a separate copy of our items array in another state variable. Originally we had 2 separate copies of our items array. So when one got updated, our selected items state just kept the old version because there was nothing triggered to change it. So that's why we got that weird mismatch between the display text at the bottom and what we saw up here in the form itself. Now, all we're doing when we update the selected ID is we're going into the items array itself. We're not creating a duplicate array and going into that. We're going into the items array itself and using that in whatever state it currently exists in. And then after we update that, then we display the title down here. So we no longer have duplicate arrays sitting out there and getting out of sync. All right, so let's read that again. In this example, instead of a selected item object, which creates a duplication with objects inside items. So let's see what they did here up again. What they did up here was they created a separate version of the items array that was different than this one, right? It's created a completely separate object and used that to just track the item IDs. But what we do here instead is we reference only the ID itself and then just look that up against the items array. Set selected ID, item.id. Brevity Dev says, do you speak at any conferences? I did actually just this week. It's funny you should ask that. Yeah, I just spoke at a conference for the first time at the start of this week. But thank you though. Yeah, I did. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Instead of creating two separate arrays and having to keep them both in sync, all we're doing is making sure that we can still have two state variables, but they're referencing the same array. We're not duplicating anything in any case. Oh, thank you, Brevity. I appreciate that. Looking to do my first talk this coming January. Oh, best of luck. That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I participated in a wonderful live stream talking about misconceptions in the tech industry for folks who are not in it. Right? We see certain things in media. We see certain things in media, like in TV and movies and stuff that make programmers and hackers out to be some sort of godlike figures, right? Or there's this misconception that you need a CS degree to get into tech, and I had that misconception for years, and it really held back my career. And so I participated in a wonderful live stream with lots of very lovely, experienced folks. And we talked about ways to combat that. And one of those things is just sharing the process, right? Being honest about, okay, being honest about the learning process, being honest about the coding process, and doing things like I'm doing here and so many others are doing, where we just code stuff live on Twitch. We build projects, we go through documentation. Like, it's not magic, it's just learning. And so that's the most important part. And that was a great live stream to participate in. I did another one the next day about live coding on Twitch. And yeah, it was great. I had a possibility to speak at an art conference once. The CEO and COO didn't want me to do it, or the CEO didn't want to do it because it might give away some IP in the patents we were working on. Oh, dang, that's lame. Yeah, there was somebody at that conference that I was at from Lucasfilm, the Star Wars company. And they were like, I would love to talk about like what I'm working on and share some of the cool things that I'm working on, but they were like, I literally can't. Like, I would get fired. They just couldn't, like, they couldn't really talk about anything they were doing, because yeah, it was all highly, secretive, which I thought was kind of interesting. Brevity says, when in reality, you don't need anything besides drive to land a job being pushed down by marketing departments. Yeah, a lot of it is, just there's a measure of luck, there's a measure of perseverance, there's a measure of skill. But yeah, sometimes it's just about powering through until you finally make it. Oh, thank you, Chris. It was a great conversation. Yeah, it's out there on, I retweeted it. It's out there on my Twitter if anybody wants to watch it. Lots of wonderful folks on that panel. I learned a lot. Propaganda says, what do you mean? We are not gods. I am Prometheus, must bring back the fire. Well, one of the things that we talked about on that panel was it's important when we are, uh, putting ourselves out there on social media. It's okay to be proud of your accomplishments, but it's also important not to push others down, and to say, things like, oh, I'm the only one that can do this, or, oh, this is, nobody else could do this but me, or things like that. That really disenfranchises others. First rule of Lucasfilms: don't talk about Lucasfilms. Apparently, yeah. They were a really nice person, though. I'm sure they're doing amazing things. Oh, thank you for sharing that code for dopamine, and Chris. Appreciate that. All right. Yeah, but yeah, that was super fun. And I hope to do that again. I'm speaking at another conference in July, I think. Um, and so, yeah, it's a lot of fun to do, and really good practice, and really good to meet those types of wonderful people. Brevity. Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you said that. They say development and software wouldn't thrive without us all lifting each other up and improving on the work of others. Absolutely. We are standing at all points. We are standing on the shoulders of all those who have come before us, right? The folks that wrote these docs, the folks that, I don't know, came up with the concept of hooks, um, the folks that came up with JavaScript, right? It's all iterative. It all builds on each other. No one lives in a vacuum. No one creates in a vacuum. We are all community taught and learn together. So yeah, I'm glad you said that. That was one of the things that came up during the talk, actually. No problem. Oh boy. Okay, so here's an example, just one more time. Here's an example of what happened with the previous state, why it didn't update correctly, why the text down here at the bottom wasn't updating correctly when we updated here until we clicked on the choose button. So the state used to be duplicated like this. In our item state, we had an object containing everything. And then in our selected item state, we were storing a copy of whatever object we selected. So that's how the state was constructed. We were storing a full copy of that entire object when we didn't need it. It was already in the items array. We just made a copy and dumped it in our selected item state. However, as we know, state does not update unless you call its set function. And at no point in that code did we call set selected item, right? So this remained pretzels until we click the button again. Now, after the change, we've removed this unnecessary duplication and basically said, all right, our items array is going to contain all the objects like before, but our selected ID really only needs to contain the ID value itself. We can then go look that up from the items array to make sure that our value always updates and remains current, right? We always want to stay in sync with this items array in case we change something. So there you go. The duplication is gone and you only keep the essential state. In this case, we still have two state variables, but one of them has been pared down to only what we need, which is the value itself. We do not need another copy of the entire object when we can just look it up against the array it came from. All right. Time enjoyed. Hey, how's it going? I hope you're having a good day. We're talking about React State today, so it's a good day. Good to see you. How's the birds? They good? I love your birds. Okay, so duplication is gone. We keep only essential state. Now, if you edit the selected item, the message below will update immediately. This is because set items triggers a re-render, and items.find would find the item with the updated title. You don't need to hold the selected item, the whole thing, in state, because only the selected ID is essential. The rest can be calculated during render. Good. I'm glad you're doing well. Budgies are good. Good. I'm glad. They're so cute. All right. The next thing we want to do is avoid deeply nested state. Imagine a travel plan consisting of planets, continents, and countries. Oh, interesting. Um, I would love to be able to travel to different planets at will, but we're not quite there yet, given the uh, dubious success of Starship earlier in the week. I think we're stuck on Earth for a while, at least until they can repair the launch pad. You might be tempted to structure its state using nested objects and arrays, like in this example, right? So here in the visual, we have, kind of an outer list, and then we've got inside of there, we've got all the countries, or sorry, we've got all the continents, and then down there, inside of that, we've got all the countries, right? So it's nested. So how would we do that? Ooh, Brevity Dev, thank you for the sub. Prime sub too, so it doesn't cost them anything at all. So how would we do that? Well, it might be tempted to say, well, my state should also look like that, right? Maybe I need nested state. And so what they've done here is, wow, that's intense. So the state, we've got the ID of the outer one. This looks like almost like an API response, right? We've got an object, got ID, title, child places. Okay, so I see. So this is the object itself, and then inside of so inside of here, we're setting our state and passing in this massive, ridiculous object, right? Initial travel plan. This is one massive, redonkulous, disgusting object. And what we're doing is we are taking that and we are setting that as our state. Maybe not the best idea, because so now we have to think about, okay, can we update that? Like, is that going to be physically possible to update that correctly? How's that going to work? Space elevator is the key. Yeah, I agree. Space elevators are great. I love thinking about them. And Third Decade says, would you go to Mars? Yeah, I would. Frankly says, I've been called worse. Talk about disgusting object. Nah, you're not disgusting. So now let's say you want to. Oh, Buzzy, thank you for the raid. Raid time. Thank you, thank you. Hi, folks. We are talking about. Welcome. It's been a while since I've had a raid. Thank you. We are talking about state in React. And we've got a really interesting example here. This is a giant, like, nested object, and it's got a bunch of planets, continents, place names, and it's huge, right? It kind of looks like something you might get back from an API. And down here you can see, like, we've got a couple other planets, and then locations on those planets. Corntown? Somebody is that a place on Mars? Corntown? Green Hill? Hey, Blue Valley. Thank you for the raid. It's a place now. Yeah, I want to go to Corntown on Mars. Let's do it. Oh, thank you for the follow. I'm glad you like Corntown, because we're going there. Corntown sounds like Central Ohio. Yeah, I think so. All right, so we've got this giant object, and what we're doing with it in this example is they're using it as state. Use state. They're setting the initial value to that whole big object, which, I mean, yeah, it's physically possible, but should you? Probably not. Because what they say here is, let's say you want to add a button to delete a place you've already visited. How would you do that? Updating nested state involves making copies of objects all the way up from the part that changed. You'd have to make a copy of all that nasty stuff that, everything from the child up through the rest of the object, right? First we were working on a Game Boy game, then we played Jelly Car Worlds, not sponsored, for a while. Good, I'm glad you had fun. Working on a Game Boy game. Okay, I'll have to check that out. That sounds interesting. Hey, I'm de jour. Yeah, you messaged me earlier today, didn't you? Yeah, good to see you. Wormtown, not sponsored. I just said that before. I was talking about Twizzlers and like Ocean Spray, and I kept saying not sponsored because yeah, it's been all about the brand names today. I don't know. By the way, buy key lime pie flavored Twizzlers. They're excellent. Just FYI. The pull and peel ones, yeah, they are. They're pretty good. Maybe not. Hey, you won't know if you don't try. Aw, thank you, du jour. Okay, so basically the gist is that if we use a gigantic nested object as our state, if we want to update like Vanuatu or add an item or whatever, we're going to be have to make a copy of that entire object up to that point. So all the way up from the part that changed. If your state is too nested to update easily, consider making it flat. Here's one way you can restructure this data. Instead of a tree-like structure where each place has an array of children, like in that object, right? We saw a bunch of nesting going on. The outer object had the planets, and then inside of that planet was nested, array of continents and then cities and whatever. You can have each place hold an array of its child place IDs, kind of like we saw in the previous example, right? Instead of holding the places themselves, we held the child IDs, and so it became much easier to update without going out of sync. Then store a mapping from each place ID to the corresponding place. It kind of reminds us of a database table. If you're familiar with that sort of thing, I very much am, but I don't know how many of you are. Um, Key lime pie Twizzlers sounds worse than sugar cookies and soy sauce. Ah, no, it's way better than that. It tastes like key lime pie, and I love key lime pie. So I consider myself a key lime pie connoisseur. All right, so let's see how they changed this state to not be nested anymore. Let's see how they flattened it out. So initial travel plan. We just have IDs here. We can see 0, 1, 2, and that corresponds with, Earth, Moon, Mars, right? 0, 1, 2, 3. Oh, wait, actually, no, this doesn't. Sorry, I got that wrong. So just have a nice flat series of objects, each with an ID. And I see what this is doing now. I apologize. All right, so it becomes an object with multiple IDs inside of it. And what's inside of those IDs, then we have a root value with child IDs, and then Earth with its children listed out. Here we see that those children for Earth are IDs 2, 10, 19, 27, and 35. And if we look at some of those, we can see that that's true, right? 2 is Africa. And then 10 is Americas. What did they say the next one was? 19 is Asia. And I think 35 was the next one. Oceania. Yeah. So it's all flat, but we're still able to figure out exactly where the children are in this list. And so it's really truly been flattened out. It becomes an object, a flat object that's no longer nested, but each item is identified by a unique ID. Therefore, at any point, we can go to that ID, look it up, and retrieve exactly the information that we need. So no more parents and children. It's just a list. It's just a flat list with references to all of its children, right? So our root here then holds Earth, Moon, Mars under these specific IDs. Brevity says, I feel like if we're this deep in state, we should probably be pulling most of this data from an API. Yeah, this is kind of an extreme example, right? It is kind of an extreme example, but there may be times when, we don't want or can't build our own API. Who knows? But it is still good to know how to flatten state out, and that the way that it's stored. I think the more important thing here is probably the way that we store state doesn't necessarily have to reflect the way it's displayed, right? The way that we're storing our state does not necessarily have to reflect the way it's displayed, because we can do things like referencing things by their ID and looking them up that way. This reminds me of using a JSON file in your front end React app to look like a back end. Yeah, absolutely. It makes it a pretty long list though. Still going. So now that the state is flat, which is also known as normalized because we're not duplicating anything, we flatten it all out, there's no nesting, updating the nested items becomes easier. Oh, thank you for the posture check. And we'll take a break in a minute as well. So in order to remove a place now, you only need to update 2 levels of state. The updated version of its parent place should exclude the removed IDs from its child IDs array. So if we remove one, we update the parent to take that ID out of its child ID list. So that's one update. Take it out of there. The updated version of the root table objects should include the updated version of the parent place. So if we, add a new one there and it's at the root, then yeah, we need to add that ID to the list. So let's say that I complete my visit to Earth, right? Let's say I complete my visit to Earth, completed. All right, that removes it from our list because it's done, it's no longer needed. So when that happens, when we handle complete, we have to take the parent ID and the child ID. For const parent, we find the appropriate parent ID in the list. And then what we're doing here essentially is we're finding the parent and we are filtering out the ID if it was a child. So if I take Tycho here out of the moon, that's been removed from the parent's child ID list. Then we also need to update the root state object so it has the next updated parent, so that it has the updated parent. And then we're essentially just looping through the entire list and mapping them appropriately. We're saying, all right, inside of our place tree component right here, we're taking the key, ID, parent ID, places by ID, and on complete. So we're rebuilding that nesting by linking up the parent to the children again. But we can do that because all the items in our list have child IDs associated with them. And so we can say, oh, wait, this child belongs to this parent. I'm going to link them together and nest them. So it gets a little hairy, a little bit more hairy in the display maybe, because we have to rebuild that nesting rather than just passing it straight in. However, by just using IDs as references and joining to them, I'm using a database term there, we're joining by ID, then we never have to worry about trying to pass that update from the child to the parent, updating the entire object at once, getting things out of sync potentially by creating duplicate objects. If we're just referencing by IDs, then we never have to worry about that, getting our wires crossed there. But yeah, this is probably not something you have to do all that often, but it's good to know how to think of it. You can nest state as much as you like. It's not going to stop you, right? There's nothing wrong with it. But making it flat can solve numerous problems. It makes state easier to update, and it helps ensure you don't have duplication in different parts of a nested object. Exactly. So if we want to improve memory usage, let's see. Ooh, what are they doing here? If you want to remove, ideally, you would also remove the deleted items and their children from the table object to improve memory usage. So instead of just improving them from state, instead of just removing them from state, you would also remove them from the original object. But I mean, that's kind of what you would do from like a database call, right? Or an API, or well, not from an API call, but from like a database, interfacing with a database. That's what you would do. I don't know what immer is. Does anybody know what writing concise update logic with immer? Oh, okay. I haven't used that before. Anybody know what that is? So we're not going to dive too deep into this, but it's basically just saying, hey, remember, if you delete something in state, you probably want to, remove it from the original as well. Hey, Prophet Noada, thank you for the follow. Okay, I think, well, last thing here. Sometimes you can also reduce state nesting by moving some of the nested state into child components. This works well for ephemeral UI state that doesn't need to be stored, like whether an item is hovered. Yeah, so it's not always that you have to flatten everything out. It's possible that you could um, move some of that state into child components and then call on those child components and to maybe more easily create your nested display. So that could be a way that you would do it instead. Instead of trying to condense this massive state, you could just break it apart and put the child's items into additional components, which you could then, call as many times as you needed. All right. So when we come back, we'll do our recap and then we'll do some challenges. I don't know if we'll get through all the challenges, but there's 4 of them here. We'll do as many as we can get through by 6 o'clock or by, well, in the next hour. Um, and then we'll call it. I do kind of have a hard cutoff today. But we'll do, I expect we'll probably get through at least a couple of them. And then you can do the remaining challenges on your own. All right. So we're going to take 5 minutes because we like to be healthy. We're going to take 5 minutes and take a break. And then when we come back, we're going to actually put some of this knowledge to the test and do some challenges. Oh, Brevity Dev. Thank you so much for the sub. Wow. 3rd decade, you got a sub. Thank you for the gift. I appreciate it, Brevity. It's been a pleasure having you here so far. I hope you're enjoying it. Yeah, absolutely. 3rd decade, try out your new emotes. You have access to a lot of little adorable emotes now. Okay. 5 minutes on the clock. And then while the timer is going, I'm going to set up the poll that 3rd decade requested as well. So be sure to vote in that. It should be visible by the time you get back from break. So 3rd decade requested a poll. I'll set that up and I will see you back here in 5. That's a great emote to start with, 3rd decade. I very much approve. Okay, folks, we got about a minute left in the break. So come on back when you're ready. Teddy Gavi, thank you so much for the follow. Brevity says, lurking while I make dinner for my kids. Have a good rest of the stream. Thank you for stopping by, Brevity Dev. I hope you enjoy your dinner. HYG Mod says, I asked ChatGPT for reasons we might want to set a static state from a prop. Oh yeah, I'll go over this message when everybody gets back because I think this is a good one. All right, get yourself a glass of water, get up and stretch if you haven't already, and then come on back. All righty, my camera back on here. Boop, there we go. Okay, so number one, the poll is currently active. So there is a poll at the top of your chat window. If you'd like to participate, basically what it's asking, there's a character limit on the question, but basically what it's asking is, do you agree with the recent calls from various groups and individuals to essentially ban um, training new AI models for at least 6 months. There was a call out there to say, hey, no new AI development for at least 6 months. We got to sort this stuff out. What's the effect going to be? There's calls out there to ban it. So if you want to vote in the poll whether or not you agree with that, click on the poll at the top of your chat window and then choose the appropriate option. I'm curious to see what the answer is. After the poll is closed, then I'll share my own opinion. Do the dishes if you haven't. That's a good suggestion, Mattel. And then HYG Mod says, I asked ChatGPT for reasons we might want to set a static state from a prop. Like we talked about before, that is something that you can do, right? You can take a prop and you can assign it to a state variable, but like, why would you want to? Because it's not going to update. So why we might want to do that is to ensure consistent values are displayed throughout the app. You might want to display a value that corresponds to the initial locale prop. To avoid unnecessary updates, components might maintain their appearance or behavior based on the initial settings prop that was passed to them. Oh, okay. And it would also allow for caching to improve performance. Yeah, so I can see that. So if there was an initial sort of a setting, like an appearance setting, that you wanted to be reflected across all of your components and keep everything, make sure everything kept the same appearance based on the initial render. So maybe like I'm thinking about some kind of like time-based appearance. So if a deadline is approaching, buy tickets now to this concert, and you wanted the whole overall appearance of the site to reflect like the brand of the concert or the celebrity who is going to be performing during that time, you would pass an initial static like time prop based on, yes, this concert is upcoming, so therefore I'm passing this prop. I want all the appearance of all components on the site to, when somebody loads the page, they should all reflect this concert appearance, and that should not change throughout the entire use of the application or website, right? That should always stay with this particular concert backdrop. But then as soon as the concert is over, you would want to make sure that that didn't show up. So you would pass the generic appearance prop and make sure that that stays the same throughout somebody using the site. So I could, yeah, that makes sense. Cat GPT is apparently worth it. Okay, good to know. All right, so quick recap, and then we'll go into an example or two. So if two state variables always update together, consider merging them into one. So with multiple, like a single state variable with multiple possible states inside of it, so they remain mutually exclusive. Choose your state variables carefully to avoid creating impossible states. So if, for example, if you wanted a, is sending and is sent, if you had those as separate state variables, it's possible that both of those could be true at the same time, and that's not a valid state. So therefore, those should be combined probably into a single one. Structure your state in a way that reduces the chances that you'll make a mistake updating it. Yeah, you don't want your state to be so complex that you can't figure out how to change it. Avoid redundant and duplicate state, so you don't need to keep it in sync. Yeah, we kind of already talked about that, right? You don't want to have to remember to call 3 set functions every single time your UI is changing, right? That would be annoying and easy to forget one. And then don't put props into state unless you specifically want to prevent updates. We kind of talked about that already. Um, for UI patterns like selection, keep ID or index in state instead of the object itself. And we saw why that could cause a problem before. The original object was changed, but because we were also storing that object um, inside of a separate state, then that anything relying on that separate state didn't get updated. So what we would want to do instead is only store the object ID and then look it up against the original array. If updating deeply nested state is complicated, try flattening it. Yep, and we saw that before too. Skynet don't care. Skynet does what it wants. That's true. All right, so let's put some of this into practice. Challenge 1 is let's fix a component that isn't updating. This clock component receives 2 props, color and time. When you select a different color in the select box, the clock component receives a different color prop from its parent component. However, for some reason, the displayed color doesn't update. Let's see if we can figure out why that might be. So what's wrong here? So I'm going to select midnight blue. Okay, yep, I can see the problem. Nothing is happening. All right, let's look at the component and see why that is. Hey, Dan Can Code, good to see you. Hope you're having a good day. We're doing some challenges, so Dan, if you want to dive right in with us, you can. So we have our clock component here, which, as they already say, it's taking in the color from its parent. So color is being passed in right here. And let's see, it looks like we've got a state variable here, and we're capturing that state. The initial value of that state is going to be set to the color value from the props, and then we return it. So what's the problem here? Kulak Burak, thank you for the follow. Can anybody spot the problem with this? Why it's not updating? Hi, Kulak. So a couple folks saying we're missing a keyword. Frederico says not calling set color and re-rendering. Sure. Is that, we could do that, right? We could do that. We could call set color and re-render, because you're right. We're setting color to the initial prop, right? But whenever that prop changes, whenever we pick a new color and that gets passed in, there's no trigger to update, right? There's no trigger to update our state value. So yeah, we could absolutely call set color and, force a re-render. But is there a better way? Is there a better way to handle this? We saw a similar example of this a little farther up in the docs. Feel free, you can scroll up if you're following along in the docs. By the way, I'll put it in chat exactly where we're at. There you go. So we had a very similar example a little farther up in the docs about why putting a prop value into state causes a problem, which you've already identified. So what do you think we might want to do instead? Delete line 4. Sure, we could try that. Okay. And Dan says, and update line 6. Okay. All right, so let me make sure I get this right. So, color, up like line 6. Well, line 5. Yeah, I was gonna say, wait. Yeah. So, what do we want to do instead, right here? Thank you for the follow, sluggish cat. Yeah. Okay. So I see what you said. I see what you said there. I just didn't read your message properly. All right. So what Dan is saying is that, well, instead of just trying to reference a state, why don't we just reference the actual props? We could just say props dot color, right? Why do we need a state variable at all when we could just reference the props themselves? And like we talked about before, in the case when we're passing in props from a parent to a child, the expected behavior is that the child is going to obey the parent and use those props accordingly, and update its behavior, right? It's going to listen to the parent explicitly. If new props are passed in, it better acknowledge those props and change its display or change its logic and based on those props. It needs to listen and not not talk back to the parent, right? Not refuse to do what the parent is saying. And if in the original case of this, um, with that, what that state variable did was it blocked the component from listening to the parent, right? Now, yes, we could have added a set color function call in here. Absolutely, we could have done that. But why? When we could just pass the props directly, right? There's no need for state in this case. So let's try this now. Hey, there we go. It's a working. It's working. It's working. It's working. Just like in real families, parents ignore changes in their children. Yes, yes. React. As we recall, information only flows downward, right? The parents get to tell their children what to do. The children do not get to talk back or ignore the request or pass information back up to the parents. It is a one-way street. It's a very unhealthy family dynamic, but there you go. First try. Thanks, Chris. Okay, so this was a fairly easy fix, right? And in this case, it involved just not using state at all because we don't need to. There's no reason. The props do everything we need here. And another way we could write this as well. I'm not personally. I'm not a huge fan of the props object like as a whole because remember the props are whenever we pass props from a parent to a child, they are bundled into an object. All the props are bundled together by default into an object called props. But what we could do instead, if we wanted to, is we could use our friendly neighborhood brackets and break out those props into individual values of color and time and change our notation slightly to just be color is color and time is time, and it will do the exact same thing. Now, does anybody recall what do we call this when we take the props object and we break it into its component parts? Still works. What do we call this when we do it? When we take that props object and break it out? Yeah, it's destructuring, exactly. And Dan brings a separate perspective there, saying, "I'm not super sold on destructuring props. I find reading props.color immediately tells me where color comes from." That's true. It does immediately identify that it is a prop and not a regular variable. That's a good point. Unless I need a default value for color. Yeah, that's a good point. Is that using props dot whatever immediately identifies that it is a prop and it was passed from a parent component. So that's fair. Yeah, absolutely. Clock, color, time. I'm just looking to see what Chris posted here in chat. Clock, color. There's a couple different ways to go about destructuring. Yeah, it looks like you're still. It's a little hard to tell. It looks like you're still using state there. So you're still going to have the issue with potentially not updating properly, right? So you need to have a set. You need to call set clock color at some point in order for it to update properly. Maybe you're doing that though in your example. Okay, so that one wasn't too bad. And then really in this example, right, we ignored state entirely. We didn't use state at all. So let's go on to the next one where hopefully we'll get the chance to actually use state and set state as well. All right, challenge 2. We're going to fix a broken packing list. This packing list has a footer that shows how many items are packed. Shows how many items are packed and how many items there are overall. It seems to work at first, but it's buggy. For example, if you mark an item as packed and then delete it, the counter will not be updated correctly. Fix the counter so it's always correct. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fork this because the code is kind of wide. So let's just go over here and look at it this way. So it said if you mark an item as packed and then delete it, the counter will not be updated correctly. So they want us to fix the counter so that it is always correct. All right, so warm socks is packed. I'm going to go with watercolors, and I'm going to delete watercolors because I'm not good with watercolors, so I don't need them. I'm going to delete them. Boop. Uh-oh. That's no bueno. It still says 2. If you can read that, it still says 2 out of 2 packed. Now, what happens if I add something else? I'm going to add cheese. Uh-oh. That's not looking good. Let's see if we can figure out what might be going wrong here. All right. So we're initializing our initial items, right? We have an array of initial items here, these 3, and they have a packed value of true or false in the object itself. Okay. And then we're setting up some state here. We're setting up items, an array of items, and we're setting that state to an initial value of our array of items. That makes sense, right? So the initial value is just going to be set to this array. And then our total is going to be hard coded to 3 because the initial array has 3 items in it. So we're hard coding that to 3. And then packed is also hard coded to 1 because packed value here is true. And so we would want our packed state to reflect the count of packed items initially. So 1 and 1, and then 3 items here and 3 items here. So we're just mirroring that to make sure that everything lines up. But I can already kind of maybe sense some potential problems here. Who knows? All right, we'll see. Yeah, exactly. As Dan says, madness. Your data will get out of sync. Inevitable. Yeah, I wonder if that could be what's happening here. So when we add a new item, essentially all we're doing is we are taking our total and we're calling our set function and we're updating total by 1. Okay, sure. And I imagine that for delete, we'll see the opposite. We'll take total minus 1. Cool. And then items, we're just adding an item to that array. You know, we're getting everything that's already in there, and then we're adding 1 to it. Perfect. So then on change, when you click the check mark, if next item equals packed, then we set packed to pack plus 1, else subtract 1. Okay, interesting. So we're changing packed here when you click. Yep. I'm curious if this will go to 4 out of 3 if I click this. Uh-oh. Yeah, that's really not right. Okay. And I'll get more out of sync if I were to delete another one here. And then finally, we call set items to then update the original array. So we have to, I'm already seeing we're duplicating a lot of state updates here, right? We're setting our packed items plus 1. Then we have to update the original array. And then finally for deletes, Oh, I think I see a problem here. For deletes, we're set total, total minus 1, and we're setting items, and we're taking that ID that we deleted out of the array, right? We're taking that out of the array, so it's no longer in there. But what's missing here? What do we don't see? Changing total, changing the array itself, but what's missing in here? Forgetting any kind of, state duplication and things like that. What fundamentally, what if we were to change nothing else? What's missing from this particular function? Yeah, exactly. We're missing a call to set pat, right? That's why this number has gotten out of sync, because we have these three states that we're trying to keep together, but in this particular handle delete function, we have neglected to update all three when that's kind of important. We should have updated set total, set items, and set packed. That kind of sucks, right? That's hard to remember to do. It's hard to remember to do. Yeah. So, is that really what we want to do? Yes, it would work, right? It would work. Like we could fix if we wanted a quick and if we wanted a quick and easy if we wanted a quick and easy fix, right? If we were like 5 minutes from deadline, and we just needed to get it working, um, then yeah, we could absolutely do that. But it's going to create a nightmare for us to come back and fix anything later or add anything later, right? Refactoring. Refactoring costs more. Yeah, maybe, if you want to get your prototype done quick and out in front of the executives and get feedback, then maybe that's what you would do. But I'm thinking we should probably refactor this, because like we talked about before, we can get this kind of information about total and pat from what's already in the array, right? We already have this information. Why are we trying to keep all these things in sync and keep them all balanced together when this is all stuff that could be gleaned from the array itself? We don't need these. They aren't required. They aren't necessary, right? And Mattel says, shouldn't you always update all states all the time? Yeah. And this example didn't do it. So, I mean, if you wanted to keep all these separate states, you should be updating them when something changes, because they need to stay in sync. But that's not how that's not the best approach for this particular example, right? We don't need three separate states when they are meant to stay in sync with each other. So, kind of rule of thumb, when you see these values that are meant to stay in sync with each other, maybe they could all be triggered off of the same state, one state, rather than three. That's the easiest way to keep them in sync. We can still have three different, values. We can still have a total value and a packed value, but we don't necessarily need to hold it in a state which is going to get unbalanced, right? Because it inevitably will. Like Dan said, it's gonna get out of sync. We're hard coding stuff in here. What happens if I change the initial array to have another value in it? I would have to remember to update this as well. And if it was packed, I'd have to update this as well and change all these initial values too. That sucks. That's going to get out of sync right away. So let's think about how we can refine this a little bit to hopefully make it easier to use. So I'm going to leave the initial array as is. And instead of three separate states, really, I only need my array, because I can get everything else that I need from this array itself. Makes it a bit more expensive, but more consistent. Yeah, and I really think it's worth it's going to be really expensive to add anything to this. If we left it as is, it's going to be really expensive to add things to it. It's going to be really expensive to change any of the initial values. Yeah. Oh gosh, I haven't watched Team America World Police in way too long. I don't have any references other than that song. You know the song. All right. So I think we're just going to keep this one, and then we're going to figure out how we can kind of trigger everything else off of our items state. Um, so our first problem here, Marco, yeah, you know how it goes. All right. Our first item here is total. So obviously it's underlined because we no longer have this, total value. This doesn't exist anymore. So what's a way that I can get the total count of items from this array? Matt Damon, yeah. What's a way that I can get the count of items in this array? Array methods quiz. Didn't see that coming. What's the quickest and easiest way to go into an array and get the count of items in it? Call a senior dev. That's why you need to know your array methods, so you don't have to do that. Thank you for the follow, Sarita Manu. Thank you. Size of but Frederico, I think, has the winning answer there. There's obviously several ways to do these things in all cases, but I think the cleanest way is probably just doing array.length, right? That's a built-in array method. It will give you the length of the array, and that's what you get back. So I think we're going to do that. So we don't have a state anymore, but I can just declare a regular variable that triggers off of that state. And that variable, for consistency's sake, is just going to be called what is it called? Total. Yeah, and we can just say items dot length. There we go. All right, const total items dot length. And then I'm going to also declare another regular variable, which is then going to be triggered off of our items state also. So these variables will be managed by our items state, so they will never get out of sync. No more hard coding. All right, so const packed is going to be, let's see, what do we want to do for packed? So for packed, what does packed need to be? Packed needs to be, it's a count, isn't it? Yeah, it's a count. Okay, so packed is another count. So I'm going to do something dot length, but how do I get, basically what I want is an array of only the items that are packed. So how do I take my items array and make it only give me the ones that are packed? I'm trying not to say the word. Yeah, and code for dopamine says count all the packed is true. That's correct. What's a way that I could do that? What's a way that I can take an array and only grab things that meet a certain criteria and then give me an array with only those items in it? Array methods quiz number 2. So we got a couple of different answers there. We could do filter. We could do reduce. Yeah, yep. So those would work. Those could work in slightly different ways. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Yeah. So those would both work and in slightly different ways, right? So what filter allows us to do is it returns it back another array that only contains matching values, and then we can just do a dot length on that. And then what reduce does is it loops through the array, finds matching criteria, and counts those. Either one, I think, would be fine. I'm going to use filter here just for consistency with the final solution of the problem. But yeah, reduce would work too. I think there's no problem with that. So packed, we're going to do packed items. And also, I don't use filter very much, and I think that it's good to practice. I don't know why I don't use filter, but so filter, it takes in a function, and what we're looking for is a true response from item.packed. So item.packed is a Boolean. It's either true or false. And we want to look for the true ones. And so we just say, hey, give me back any item where this expression is true. Give me back any item where this expression is true. And that will just grab all the things that are packed. If we wanted to get all the things that are not packed, We could just do, exclamation point item packed, but that's not what we want, so I'm not going to do it. And then from that, we take that array and we get the length of it. Okay. And then I'm missing a parenthesis, I think. Filter, items.filter. Okay, constpacks, items.filter, constpack, items.filter, and then, idem, sorry. There we go. That's the problem. Me and my S. Yeah, and you could use map too. There's also, that's what I love about array methods, is there's so many of them that like you can take your pick. It's a buffet. Thank you, Benz, for the follow. Thank you, Saul Emerald for the follow. Much appreciated. Good catch on that too. Y'all caught it before I did. Okay, so now we have these conventional variables that are managed by our overarching items state, right? This is the array of items, and all of these conventional variables will always stay in sync with our items array. They're never going to get out of sync. Cool. I think that is a good start. Buffet. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay. So we got to update all of our functions to reflect these appropriately. So now instead of set total, we can't call set total anymore because total does not exist as state. That's not a thing that we have anymore. But do we need to? We no longer need to manually update our total anymore, right? Because as soon as we add an item to our items array, total is just going to be updated to whatever the length of the new array is. So that becomes no longer something that we have to worry about. It will automatically be updated by reading the length of our items array. So perfect. I'm going to get rid of it. Hey, simplification, baby. Don't talk bleep about total. Hey, it was a good state while it lasted, but it just became something we didn't need anymore. Off to the Shadow Realm, indeed. Nice Yu-Gi-Oh reference. Very good. All right. So I think that's good. I think that's all we need to do there. Now, I think for change, we're going to need to do a little bit more, because for change, we also called set packed. Again, this becomes redundant, right? This becomes redundant. So actually, wait, I think we can just get rid of this, right? We no longer need to manually set the count of packed items, because again, that is being read from the array itself. So, okay, I'm going to get rid of it. Cool. Let me make sure. I think my parentheses are still okay. Good stuff. All right. And again, for delete, we no longer need to call set total. That's going to happen automatically. Cool. I get rid of that as well. And I think, let's see if we've got it. I'm not sure. I don't know if we need to change anything down here, but I'm just going to see what happens. All right, 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the counter is working correctly. That's good. Now, what happens if I delete? I'm going to delete travel journal. Hey, look at that. Nice. I'm going to add an item. I'm going to say cheese. All right, still working. And look, my total updated correctly, right? It went down, it went up. And yeah, the counter is still working correctly. Boom. Looks like we got it. Go us. And so all we did there really is we just came to the realization that, hey, this state, this items state, which is containing this initial items array, already has everything that we need. We don't need to try to manually keep other states in sync with this array, when we can use our knowledge of array methods and other operations to just get everything we need out of this. It's already all here. Why do we need to duplicate stuff we already know, or stuff that we can use array methods to retrieve ourselves? So that's what we did there, and it actually allowed us to clean up our code a little bit. There was not very much refactoring involved. And the reason we were able to limit the amount of refactoring we needed to do is we just replaced those old state variables. I'm just gonna say this: replaced old state variables with regular variables controlled by controlled by the one remaining state variable. Yeah. So now everything stays in sync with no effort from us. And thank you for the follow, Ryan KGU. Thank you so much. Code says, felt like when I code with React, I just can never trust how small changes seem to work without errors. Yeah, and so that could be due to decisions that you made when building your state initially that cause it to be things to get out of sync, things to not respond the way you think. And that's not to say that, that like you're bad at React or anything. It's just sometimes it's good to, build it out and then try it and see where things go wrong and then maybe refine your state down a little bit. One nice thing about, working with React in dev mode is that it calls everything twice. So it uses strict mode by default. And so it'll call all your components twice. And so that way, if you have any problems in your components that are not, delivering the correct results, you'll immediately see that because you'll get two separate results for the two times it's called. But yeah, I mean, it could be easy to, if you have a lot of components, it could be easy for them to get out of sync if the state is, friable in that way. Taco Killa Haijo Tacos. Thank you for the follow. I've gotten so many new followers during this stream today. Thank you all so much. It's great to see it. Okay, we got about 10 minutes. I'm just gonna peek at the next example, see if we have time to do it. I don't know. Maybe. Ooh, that's kind of a big one. Hang on. Fried. Like deep fried state. I meant friable, like it frays, it splits. I think that's the word. Friable. Somebody can Google that. Slaghetti. That's a great username. Slaghetti, thank you for the follow. Yeah, friable. Friable itself is a word. Friable. Is that? But I want to make sure I get the meaning right. Somebody else can Google that. Code for Dopamine says also, while const usually in JavaScript means non-changing, I assume the entire default function travel plan gets run every time it detects a change. Are you talking about the state variable? We set the state variable as a const. It is, and then we can call set. We can call set to update that state, and the const still holds true there because the value of the state does remain constant throughout the execution of that component. So the const keyword is true there. The state will not update until the component re-renders, thus calling the component again, or until the till that portion of the UI re-renders, and then in which case the component is executed again with the updated state value as a new const, which cannot be updated until the next re-render. So the const keyword is valid there. Control A and delete, then redid the code. Hi, Slaghetti. Yeah, code for dopamine. That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. Because yeah, seeing that const keyword there could be kind of confusing. Like seeing const on state, you're like, wait, but state can change. So how can this be a const? Shouldn't it be a let? But in the microcosm of that execution of the code, it is a const. I think having this const keyword here is a good reminder that you can't update state. You start out with an initial state and you can't change that value while the component is executing. You can't do that. If you console log it, it'll still be the same value. If I were to call, if I have my state here called letters, if I called set letters somewhere in this component and then I immediately did a console log, I would see that change is not shown in my console log. It's not there. It's being held until the next re-render. Yep, it's important to remember. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, I don't think we have time to do this examples 3 and 4. Because yeah, I do have a hard stop at 6. But I like that we got to answer that other question about state. So do feel free to go and do examples 3 and 4. I believe this one doesn't have a hint, but I think example 4 does. Yeah. So if you need a hint on this last example, you can click show hint and it'll give you some more information. But it's really more of just cleaning up state and figuring out, okay, how can we work smarter, not harder on our state here and make these a little cleaner. This one's kind of interesting. You're fixing a bug in your state that when you click this star button, you can see how the highlight blinks. If I don't move my cursor, I click that star button, the highlight goes away until I move my cursor. I don't know how well you can see it on stream, but you click the cursor. If you don't move it, it stays unhighlighted until I move the cursor again. So it's a weird bug. So hopefully y'all can find it. But these are all keying off of principles that were earlier in the doc that we talked with earlier in the chapter. So we did talk through these examples. And so see if you can figure out which concepts apply here to update this state. Example 4 is a single toggle box. And they want us to convert it to a multi-select. So instead of just a single select, we want to convert it to a multi-select. And just on this one, I would suggest when you're solving it, I would suggest looking at the places that say to do. So the developer on this one has left multiple to dos, and so if you're trying to figure out how to do this, I would focus on the parts that say to do, and figure out what you need to change in each location in order to facilitate a multi-select capability. So we might go back and revisit these 3 and 4 next week. I need to look at what this next section has in it and see how big it is, whether we want to spend our whole time talking about this section or do these last 2 examples and then move on. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Hey, little robot. IRL word band. Don't say so. Oh, yeah, I said it. Yeah, I do say that a lot. Yep, that's one of my little vocal tics I'm aware of. Yep. Unfortunately, we are ending the stream, so your word ban really isn't going to apply for long, but I'll do my best to not say that word until the end of the stream in a couple minutes. Yeah, code for dopamine. It does rerun the entire code instead of applying the JavaScript way of updating an array. Yep. Yeah. I think and that's a good point you bring up as far as the const word not applying to arrays. But I mean, I could be wrong, but I think in this case, const is specifically meant to address the immutability, the non-changingness of state. Dr. Moto says, any downside to using let when in doubt? I wouldn't use it with state variables at all, just because they have a set structure for how you're supposed to declare them. So I would not, I said it. Therefore, I would not use them. I would not use let when declaring state variables. But yeah, I mean, overall, I would say I use let more than const. Sluggetti says, looking forward to it. Nothing like React component life cycles. Hey, Na CT Tam. Welcome to the stream. Hello. We're just about done, but I will be streaming again next Sunday. I think we'll need to do that, drunk Uncle Grandma. Yes. And I realized I forgot to look at the results of the poll too. I meant to do that and then I didn't. So real quick, last thing. I said the word again. I'm mindful of it now. I'm aware. I do say it a lot. All right. Let's look at the poll. View results. Oh wow. Okay. It was pretty heavily weighted. The majority, 75% of those who responded said they do not agree with requests to ban or pause AI research. Um, I would say I tend to agree, if only because in the past, when bans on research and development have been unevenly applied, you tend to get bad actors flocking to those places where the research is allowed with no restrictions, right? So oh, I said it again. Somebody keeping tally. It's like five. That's like 5 times. Thanks, Matelgi. Thanks for stopping in. So yeah. Oh, I caught myself that time. But yeah, I would tend to agree that I disagree with the ban. Research is going to happen regardless. That's kind of when it comes to research and like innovation. I think you can't stop the train that's coming down the tracks as far as this stuff. It's so hot right now. I said it again, and but it was in a movie quote, so hopefully that counts. Um, yeah, that's my general opinion. It was a hard one, absolutely. I failed miserably. Little Robot says, "I just spent 3 minutes seeing the word that you said the most." Wow, that's a lot of effort. Sluggetti says, "Looking forward to it. Nothing like React component life cycles." Absolutely. We're gonna next week. We're gonna be looking at sharing state between components. This is where we can actually start to interlink. So far, we've really been looking at just individual components. I said it again. I caught myself that time. I heard it. Um, thus far, we have only been looking at individual components. Um, and what we're going to look at next week is how can we make state apply to multiple components simultaneously and share that state between them and really create a cohesive UI, a cohesive user interface using state to keep it in sync. So that's where the magic starts to happen. I said it again. And we can build a cohesive user interface that way. All right. I'm going to catch up with the remainder of chat here and then we'll call it for today. Dan says, "I think I'm still going on Rufio's stream tomorrow to talk about unit testing and TDD if anyone's interested." Ooh, that sounds fun. Yeah. Do check out Hello, it's Rufio with special guest Dan Kincode. Rufio is really great about having guest speakers on their stream, and they do a really great job of facilitating that. And they have tons of guests, super fun. So at Hello, it's Rufio. I think I can do them a shout out here. Shout out. Oops. Hello, it's Rufio. All right, let's see if that worked. It did. Good. Check them out. And check out Dan's guest spot on their stream. I'm sure it'll be really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Dan. Okay, we're going to quickly find someone to raid and then we're going to sign off for today. Thank you all for tuning in. If anybody has a raid target that they would like, please do let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to pick someone who is available. We've got Lana Lux. Ooh. Haven't rated them in a while. They are always super fun, and their stream is hopping today. Um, yeah, Lana Lux is an amazing game dev, and they have built like almost so like I think pretty much solo built a fully functional like game. Like it's 3D game. It's nuts. They're super good. Um, let's go. Yeah, they did a initial release of their game. Um, yeah, Unity Dev. Their game is called Strain. I think they did finish it and did like a beta or I don't know alpha beta release, one of those. And I'm sure they're still working on it. So let's raid them. They're super nice, super fun. And I will see you all next week for talking about sharing state between components and creating cohesive UIs. Yeah, it's an early. That's the word I was looking for. Early access. All right. See you all next week. Have a great rest of your day. Talk to you soon. Starting raid now. Thank you for the follow, Death Guru. No worries, James. Thanks for stopping in. All right, rating now. See ya.